Java is designed to work just about everywhere. Famously said James Gosling, the creator of Java. And we can see that to some extent he was right too. One of the most favorite languages of the enterprise apps for close to over 2 decades, Java is consistent about one thing, and that is performance. A few years back, Oracle announced a new release cycle for Java. And as per that cycle, Java is now getting a new version released in every 6 months and long term support releases in every 3 years. The new release cycle provides faster innovation and new features, as well as more predictable and consistent release dates. So, as a part of continuation to this revamped release cycle, last year in the month of September, we saw the release of Java 19 with 7 JDK enhancement proposals, or JEPs as we call them. So, the official release for Java 19 says, which is available at the Oracle's platform, that JDK 19 delivers language improvements from Open JDK project Amber, record patterns and pattern matching for switch, library enhancement to interoperate with non Java code, foreign function and memory API, and to leverage vector instructions, vector API from OpenJDK project Panama, and the first previews for project Loom, virtual threads and structured concurrency, which will drastically reduce the effort required to write and maintain high throughput concurrent applications in Java. So, since the Java release cycle has been revamped, we can see that new language features are coming faster. And to manage all that, the new release cycle also includes a new schedule. And there are generally two types of cycles, two types of releases we can see. The general availability releases, these are production ready releases, and the preview releases. These are early access builds that provide an opportunities for developer to try out new features and provide feedback before they are finalized. Java release notes often mark these features either as preview, experimental, or incubating features or APIs. So before we read Java 19 highlights, before we explore the new features, we need to be clear about what does these three terms really mean. These are basically the different categories of new and non-final features. So when we say preview feature or preview API, these are basically the early access builds of new features in Java that are made available to developers before they are finalized. These APIs are included in preview releases of the JDK, which are released every 6 months, along with the general availability releases. Preview APIs are intended to provide developers with an opportunity to try out new features and provide feedback to the Java development team before they are officially released. So these features are not considered stable and may change or can be removed in the future releases too. Developers can use preview APIs in their own projects, but it is not recommended for production use. Oracle officially advises to use these APIs only for testing, experimentation, and feedback purposes only. Once the APIs are finalized, they will be included in a general availability release and will be considered stable, and then they will become suitable for the production use. Then sometimes we find certain feature in the release note marked as experimental features. So what are they? Experimental features are the one that are related to JVM, Java Virtual Machine. These features are risky, incomplete, or even unstable, and in most cases require extra flags to turn them on from the command line. Experimental features are new features in Java and that are in the early stages of the development and of course not ready for the general use. These features are again included in the JDK to allow the developers to try them out and provide the feedback to the Java development team. And they are again not intended for the production use and may not be fully tested or documented. So, as these features are marked as experimental in the API documentation, They may be enabled or disabled using a command line flag. Now, you may ask then what's the difference between experimental features and the preview APIs? So, experimental features are different than preview APIs in the sense that preview APIs are available for testing and feedback purposes and are intended to be finalized and included in a future general availability release. But experimental features, on the other hand, are not guaranteed to be included in a future release, and they may be dropped altogether depending on the feedback and the development team's assessment about their usefulness and readiness. Then sometimes we find certain features marked as incubating features or incubating API. So, incubating feature is either a JDK API or a JDK tool of non trivial size that might one day, after improvements and stabilization, be included and supported in the Java Standard Edition platform or in the JDK. An incubating API is identified by jdk.incubator prefix in its exported package names. And an incubating API is exported only by an incubator module. So these are basically those new features in Java that are being considered for inclusion in a future release but are not yet finalized. These APIs are included in the JDK to again allow developers to try them out and provide the feedback to the development team, but they are in the incubating stage. So, incubating APIs are considered stable but may change or be removed in future releases. They are intended for use in development and testing, but not in production. They are not fully tested, and the documentation of these features may be incomplete. These APIs are marked as incubating in the API documentation, and their use is subject to certain terms and conditions, like certain license agreement or uses restriction and all that. And like experimental feature, they can be enabled or disabled using the command line flag. Now, incubating APIs are different from preview APIs in that preview APIs are intended to be finalized and included in a future general availability release, while incubating APIs are still being evaluated for inclusion in a future release. So, they may be included in a future release, but it is not guaranteed. The development team will use feedback from developers to decide whether to include them in a future release or not. To avoid unintentional use, these preview and experimental features are disabled by default, and the JDK documentation warns developers about the non final nature of these features and any of their associated APIs.